This is going to be a difficult video to write, not necessarily to record, because it's something not many people seem to talk about much in the books I've been reading or in the videos I've been watching. If it is mentioned, it's not something that is really examined or explained, it's just noted to have happened as if unconsciously by whoever it is I am viewing or reading. I've read some authors who did touch upon it beyond this is a thing. Nassim Nicholas Taleb in Skin in the Game and John Gray in Straw Dogs. I am talking about a certain subset of people, and they happen to be the majority of human beings on this planet, that seemingly are able to adapt to any cultural change in the smallest amount of time, no matter how tyrannical or liberating that change happens to be. Now, I cannot for the life of me come up with a name for these people. I could call them NPCs, but anybody could be an NPC for any reason. Normie, but even some normies do not like cultural change. I came up with the metaphor of a mannequin man. Underneath is the naked body, and on top is the new clothes they don for the new trend or regime. And it's not really because they always make a conscious choice to wear this new outfit, but that's just the NPC meme basically, but older. Events, dominant groups or individuals force most of these people into these clothes, and in many ways, they prefer it. How else can we explain the complete domination of certain religions, ethnic groups, empires, cultures in such short amounts of time? Now, not every conquest or change fits this description, but I can think of some that can. I think the most prominent example of this phenomenon was the Arab Islamic invasions of the Byzantine Empire, Persia, and Spain in the 600s to 800s AD. The Arab invasions swept all before them as they completely dominated North Africa, the Middle East, and much of Spain. A lot of that was also down to luck, at least when it came to conquering Persia and most of Byzantium. A large plague had swept both empires after a war they had both been involved in against each other, weakening them substantially. But what is so striking about the Arab invasions is not necessarily the speed of the conquest itself, but how all these areas, with the exception of Spain, converted to Islam and changed culturally. Most people in these areas did not create resistance movements or even protest against these foreign invaders as much as we think they did. They instead adapted and continued to live their lives. Part of it may have been Islam itself and the tax levied against Christians, but whatever the case, there were incentives that made people convert and then pass that on to their children. Part of it is because most people in the world are, on the whole, content with whoever rules them, as long as they leave them alone. Whether that be an outward appearance, an inward appearance, or even both. Some people will accept this change no matter what, others begrudgingly, whereas a few may be resistant at first, but ultimately are crushed. Those who are unable to adapt or unwilling either leave or are dealt with. These same people, only a few decades before, were Hellenized Christians, and now were Muslims. Now, to be true, there was a back and forth influence on each other around this period. The Arab kingdom, much like the Germanic conquerors in the West, tried to keep as much of the Byzantine and Persian structures in place and adopted much of their philosophy and technology as they could. But it was very much their culture that took precedence and ultimately dominated. And unfortunately for those who may believe in ethnocentrism, according to Taleb, that when he and the friend Pierre Zalua researched genetic data in the Eastern Mediterranean, they were shocked to discover that most people who are alive today in this region are genetically no different to the people who inhabited the region 3,400 years ago. The people we call Turkish are the same ancient Anatolians we read in history books, and in Lebanon, 9/10 of the country are the Canaanites of the Bible. In this chapter, Taleb argues it's a stubborn minority that essentially dominates the rest of society and creates incentives for the others to change. And in my opinion, what makes this even easier for a stubborn minority is human nature. Most people are geared towards copying this minority, for many reasons, and it isn't just fear. Now, why would people just accept any old controller or leader? I think primarily it is because most people probably don't value freedom in the way that we on this side of political YouTube think they do. Of course, nobody wants to be totally dominated, but some people are willing to give up more rights for more security or to be left alone. Taleb says that for his family, Lebanese Christians, there were actually some incentives not to convert. For example, avoidance of military conscription. And indeed, a lot of the Muslim rulers did not proselytize or even want more conversions. Again, Christians and Jews paid the jizya, the tax that they have to pay to remain Christian and Jews in these Muslim empires because they're considered people of the book. Why would anyone want more Muslims and make less money in this situation? Yet it happened in spite of that because of how the religion operates. Some people chose to conform to continue their way of life unabated, others to marry, and others for careers. And the reverse happened in other parts of Africa, America, and Australia and parts of Asia too when Western Christians invaded, brought Christianity to the native populations. Hell, most people in the British Empire, be they colonials or even British, probably did not care one way or another who ruled them, just so long as they could live their lives and be protected. I think another example of this is in a novel that John Gray uses as an example about human morality in his book Straw Dogs. The novel is called Utz by Bruce Chatwin, named after the title character, and is about the character's life selling porcelain in Czechoslovakia. The character endures two massive invasions in his life, first by the Nazis and then by the Soviets. Gray says the character would not even take morality into account when it came to acquiring more and more porcelain. If he was not a neutral party who didn't care that two totalitarian regimes were essentially oppressing him, then he was a collaborator of sorts, just so long as he could continue his trade or hobby. Gray uses it as an illustration of how, as much as we would like to think that morality is important, that most people are moral and live their lives by moral rules, in reality, morality perhaps does not take as center stage in our lives and decisions as we may think. But what it showed to me was this phenomenon of how people, no matter what society they live in, no matter how good or bad, will simply go along with it. I don't want to sound crass, but the terms sheeple, herd mentality, etc., the memes you will have heard about man's tendency to not be as free-thinking as we think we are most likely true. Most people are just like this. They take whatever stamp a dominant group or ideology gives them, so long as they are secure and have no qualms about either choosing to do so or unconsciously doing it. The more we accept this and understand this, the more I think we can understand how to change society. Because you will see a lot of right-wing channels or just anti-establishment channels go on about the normies and how it's them that we need to convince. Although it may be true that for some normies, because remember not all normies are like what I described, some convincing will be necessary, but most of these people don't care. They will adapt to whatever it is that they need to adapt to. We have already seen people do this as a result of Corona-chan and the lockdowns. How many people, especially at the beginning, just embraced it and did it anyway because our politicians told us to? Of course, many of us have no choice because of state force, and some of us did bravely flaunt the rules. Some of us, however much we want to resist, can't because we either need to work or are not in a position to resist. Others, however, don't care. Hell, the Karen phenomenon shows that others will actively try to force people to conform. What I am trying to say is that convincing the mannequin men is not necessary. We need to become the stubborn minority, that 10% of society that can create incentives to mold society how we like it to be. It is an historical and sociological fact that it is really a minority of people who have the ability to do this. In my opinion, it's not really down to social class necessarily, or even in a lot of cases. One can be working class, middle class, upper class, and be part of this stubborn minority that essentially guides society. Unfortunately, what is the case is that the other stubborn minority has to be fought and overcome. Now, of course, this does not mean that violence or exile in the usual manner that we think of the terms. Sometimes that is what happens, as in revolutions like the Russian and French revolutions, and even the American Revolution. Not many Americans would like to admit that in actuality, it was a minority of Americans that wanted independence. 1/3 in fact, and it was the same number who wanted to remain part of Britain too. The rest did not care or had to be convinced to join either party. If conservatives, libertarians, classical liberals, etc., whatever they may be, want to take back society from the left, then they have to bear all of this in mind. You have to work to bring about this change, to put yourselves in positions of power, boost your numbers to that 10% number that it takes to become a stubborn minority, and you also have to have no compromises if you are to be stubborn. This means using similar subversive tactics that the left used in their long march through the institutions, so be it. It's what Freedom Alternative, the Romanian libertarian, constantly advocates for. That I do too. This is a culture war, and though the weapons we use aren't guns, at least usually anyway, it is still a war. And in war, the gentlemanly fighters, those who try to fight fair, do not win. The left may have the cultural dominance and set the rules of the game, but do we even have to follow their rules? Not necessarily. There's many avenues, but we cannot think that in this war, we have to always be fair and gentlemanly and honourable. You don't win by that. Never have done. And don't think any of this is beneath you or even impossible. It is not. Most of us will simply relearn this because remember, liberalism also had to do what the Marxists have done as well. Only it was the orthodoxy for so long, it lost its ability to subvert because it became an institution for centuries. The Marxists are still somewhat malleable so they can infiltrate and subvert groups. However, it is no longer institutions and government because they already have subverted them, but subcultures, which shows their long march is fast running out of steam. The fact they are now also running into resistance each and every time since 2014 is another example example of that. The fight isn't over. You can win if you get the tactics right. But we have to make sure that we recognise people as they are, not what they ought to be. Most of society will keep on going, regardless if we win or lose. These people, many of them friends and family of ours, are not necessary to win the war. However, I hope I don't come across as saying they don't matter at all. On the contrary, we should be trying to make life as easy as possible for people, and I think most of the people here who watch me will agree with me that liberty is essential, as is an underpinning of order. If anything, we should care more, because they are easily swayed and led, because it means that they can be abused and manipulated at will by bad actors, especially in this day and age where we are bombarded with more information than we ever have done with the advent of the internet. We need to be more aware of people's susceptibility to this. But anyway, I think I've waffled on a bit too much now. I hope you gained something from this, and until next time, don't forget to like and share the video, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, and I'll see you all later.